Hi YouTube fam, thank you for joining me today. My name is Gina Marie Bova and this is where I like to come to discuss solved and unsolved true crime cases, true crime facts and stats, and missing person cases that I don't feel have gotten enough attention from mainstream media. If you're interested in everything true crime, then you definitely have come to the right place. I hope you will subscribe to this channel, and if you click that little bell next to the subscribe button, YouTube will notify you whenever I upload new content. I am so sorry about the sound quality today, and I will definitely get that fixed soon. And if you've been here before, you already know, but if you're new, let me warn you that there are going to be animal sounds. You could probably hear the little chickens in the background right now. I apologize in advance, but if I were to wait until things got quiet around here to film, then it would never get done. So we work with what we got, right? Okay, so the videos on my channel are intended for mature audiences only. Now, they're not for children. They're not for those with a weak stomach. My language is never censored, and I don't sugarcoat things. I give gruesome details, and I show photos at my discretion. These stories are hard to hear. I know, because they're hard to tell. And even though some have brought me to tears, I choose to tell them anyway, and the reason for that is that evil does not go away when we bury our heads in the sand. Nothing that I say here can prepare you for what you are about to hear. This is a tragic, terrifying, and heartbreaking story of kidnapping, brutal torture, and eventually murder. The unsuspecting victim was an innocent 17-year-old girl who was simply riding her bike home from work. The perpetrators were her peers, not even considered adults in the eyes of the law. And what these monsters put her through was worse than any horror movie. 44 days. 44 days, that's how long her nightmare lasted. 44 days of pure hell. 44 days of begging to die. 44 days until death finally came and rescued her. Please bear with me as I try to hold it together long enough to tell you this story. Junko Furuta was born on January 18, 1971 in Misato, Saitama, Japan. At age 17, she wasn't considered to be one of the coolest kids in high school. She did not smoke, drink alcohol, do drugs, stay out all night with her friends, or have any interest in dating yet. She was more mature and focused than most of her peers, and also a little bit of a nerd. She got excellent grades in school. She was intelligent, beautiful, responsible, punctual, trustworthy, a very hard worker, and super reliable. She was preparing for her future and was making her parents very proud. She was in her final year of high school. She worked part-time job after school so that she could save money for a vacation that she was planning to take at the end of the school year, sort of to treat herself after graduation for all her hard work. And she actually really deserved it. She already had a job offer that was super exciting for her, and she would begin that new career when she came back from her vacation. She did not have a car, but she did have a bicycle, so that's how she got to work and to school. And she didn't mind at all. It was a beautiful, beautiful town. Also from Misato, Japan, and just a year older than Junko, was a troublemaker named Hiroshi Miyano. He attended the same school as her, and though they were not friends, they had obviously seen each other around. It was not a very large town, and they went to the same school, so. He was known at school for being like a relentless bully. He was feared by schoolmates and adults alike. Why? Because he would brag that he had ties to the Yakuza. Now, in case you don't know what that is, the Yakuza is and was then one of the largest known crime organizations, kind of similar to the mob, only in Japan. Allegedly, Hiroshi had worked with the Yakuza as a low-level thug for some time already by this point. Since he had such a fierce reputation in school, most would try to avoid him at all costs and stay under his radar, but others, the followers type, they wanted to be his friend. They thought it was hilarious how he would treat people, and they had that mob mentality So, like, they'd see him doing, and they would do it too. You know, things that they would never have the balls to do if they were by themselves, but in a group, you know, they would pick on people and just found it hilarious and fun. If Hiroshi's reputation didn't get him whatever he was after, he would then use fear tactics or threats, physical violence. Unfortunately, one day he and Junko crossed paths. He had seen her before. He thought she was gorgeous. He always has thought that, and he had always had like a secret crush on her, a small one. And so this day he decided he was going to go and ask her out on a date. And Junko shyly said no. He persisted, but again she politely declined. And as I said before, she didn't have any interest in dating this time. She was really focused on just achieving her goals. And Hiroshi, like I said, was not used to hearing the word no. At the moment, he acted like the rejection was no biggie, that there were people around, and so he held it in. But inside, he was pissed. To him, it was like a slap in the face. He felt disrespected. There was no way in hell he was going to let that itch do that to him. Couldn't let her get away with it. And who the fuck did she think she was? Like she was better than him or whatever. And the more he thought about it, the more pissed off he would get. And he promised himself that one day, soon, he would get his revenge and make her pay dearly for refusing him. And he made good on that promise. Junko had no idea how much danger she was in now. She never saw it coming. Hiroshi had friends that he would run the neighborhood with. More troublemakers, more morons. Three of them were named Minato, Nobuharu, and Yasushi Watanabe, and Joe Aguru. And they also were bullies and known criminals who enjoyed hurting other people for their own entertainment with no regard for anyone else's feelings, no remorse, no empathy whatsoever. Hiroshi and his friends had what they considered a game that they liked to play to kill time when they got bored. They would just wander the streets in search of a vulnerable young lady that they could kidnap, beat up, gang rape, and then usually they would let her go. But not before they threatened her and her family's lives, because they had to be sure that if they let her go, she wasn't going to go run into the police. Most times they would get away without any consequences at all. Let's jump to the evening of Friday, November 25th, 1988. After completing her shift at work, Junko got onto her bicycle and started off for home, as usual. Only this time would be different. She had rode for a couple of blocks when all of a sudden, a teenage boy came out from nowhere and kicked her off of her bike and then ran off. And things, I guess, like this happened all the time back then. In this small town, the teens would call them pranks. They would just accost people for no reason other than that they were bored and they had to entertain themselves by fucking with unsuspecting people. These little assholes just found it funny. But this incident was different, and what Junko couldn't have realized at the time was that right across the street from where she was riding her bicycle stood Hiroshi and one of his friends, and they were up to no good as usual, hoping to come across somebody that they could randomly victimize, when Hiroshi noticed Junko on her bicycle and instantly came up with a plan. So he had his friend ambush her and take off, and that way he could play the nice guy that would run to her rescue. Junko gets up off the ground and realizes her leg is too injured to ride her bicycle at this time, so she picks up her bike and she's going to push it home, and she looks up and there stands Hiroshi. And he asks if she was okay, told her that he saw what just happened from across the street, and asked if he could walk her home to make sure that she would get there safely. She agreed and even thanked him. And as they're walking and chatting, she soon noticed that they were moving a bit slower over time and had gotten just a little bit off course, off track. This wasn't how she would normally go home, but she figured he was trying to take a little bit longer route so that he could spend more time with her, stalling so that he could hang out with her more. And then they walked and they were going past an abandoned building, and all of a sudden she noticed his whole demeanor completely and suddenly changed. And he grabbed her, pushed her bike down, took her inside, hit her a couple of times, knocking her to the ground, and then he raped her. And when he was done, he went through her bag and found her ID, which had her address on it. And he told her that he would have the Yakuza kill her entire family if she did not do exactly as she was told, or if she tried to escape. She was hurt, she was terrified, but he assured her that if she did what she was told, he would eventually release her. And from there, he grabbed her arm, walked her over to a motel, which wasn't all that far, where he raped her again. Now, he wasn't sure what to do with her. He knew if he let her go, she'd tell. She knew his name, she knew who he was, where he lived. He didn't quite know what to do with her now. So, he hadn't thought it all the way through. He came up with a plan, but it was just for how to grab her. Now he had her, he didn't know what to do with her. So he calls a friend. They talked for a little while. The friend thought it was hilarious that he had her, and together they decided they were going to keep her hostage for a while. So he took her to his buddy's house. Took her down to his house, upstairs. It's his parents' house. His parents are downstairs. And then they invited 2 more friends to come over so they could all have fun raping her. Now his parents were home, so Junko was instructed that she needed to pretend to be dating Hiroshi if they came into the room or asked any questions. His friends arrived soon after, and then all 4 teens gang raped her. And that one night turned into a full week of the 4 of them raping her, tying her up, beating her, force feeding her alcohol. When the parents figured out what was happening, they still did nothing to help her. Later, they stated that they were too scared to say anything. They were never arrested or charged, by the way, which really pisses me off. But anyway, I'll get back to that part later. Back at her home, Junko's parents were worried sick. Their daughter had never failed to return from work. She always let them know where she was. She was super responsible and always on time. And this time she didn't come home at all that night. And they knew something was wrong. So the next morning, her worried parents went to the police station. They reported her missing, and immediately the search began. And the story of Junko's disappearance was all over the news. Everyone in town was talking about it, and out of nowhere, all of a sudden, her parents received the phone call that they had been desperately hoping for. It was her. She assured her parents that she was fine, but she had made a decision to run away with a friend of hers and permanently move out, so they needed to stop searching for her. Don't waste their time anymore. So after receiving this call, they went and told the police, and when they received that information, they suspended the search, and the media stopped reporting about her disappearance, and nobody suspected that she had been forced to make that call. Although later, her mom would say that Junko sounded very out of breath on the phone and not at all like herself, but she was so happy to hear from her that she didn't pay attention to that back then. Now, after the police interest died down, the boys felt much safer, and now the real torture was to begin. They invited people to come over. She was consistently beaten. She had been raped over the time that she was held captive approximately 500 times by over 100 men during her nightmare. And at first, she was given limited supplies of water and food, but soon she was forced to eat live cockroaches, whatever bugs, her own vomit. She was forced to drink her own urine. At first, she was permitted to go downstairs to use the restrooms, and she knew better than to try to escape, but after a while, she could no longer make it there. She was just way too injured. She had a lot of things happen to her, and I'm going to go through a list. It's not every single thing that happened to her. There's no way to know how many different atrocities happened to her during her time in captivity here. But what I do know about is horrific. So I'm lighting a cigarette because I'm going to have a hard time getting through this otherwise. So don't judge what's happening. So, okay. They kept her tied up almost 24 hours a day until she was so damaged that she couldn't move. She was tied up. She was either tied with her arms and legs spread out like this on the floor, and raped that way and beaten on. She was forced to always be naked. It was humiliating for her, and they seen that originally, so they made sure to keep her that way because this was more about her pain, her humiliation, making her feel like shit than it was about their sexual gratification. That was just a bonus for them. When she wasn't tied to the ground, she was held, her hands tied from the ceiling, and she would hang, and they would beat her like a boxing punching bag. Her face was 3 times its natural size, completely black and blue. She was unrecognizable. They would hit her with bamboo sticks, hockey sticks, the bar from a dumbbell. They had cigarettes that they would put out on her clitoris, onto her eyelids. They would rape her with foreign objects, for example, large bottles in her anus. They used scissors to cut the place in between her vagina and her anus. They would cut it. They cut that completely all the way through. They would drop dumbbells onto her stomach while she was lying on the floor, tied up, spread eagle, I guess, to the point where she no longer had control over her bowels or bowel movements, and she defecated on the floor, which caused them to be pissed off even more and beat her even more severely. They would drip hot wax on her face and in her mouth. They put lighter fluid on her and set it on fire. They would use large sewing needle, type needles, and just pierce her breasts. She ended up having her left nipple ripped off by a pair of pliers. Her fingernails were also ripped out by pliers. So were her teeth. She had one of her eyelids ripped off as well, and the other one was burnt off. She had her anus. They put firecrackers into her anus, and they lit them and put them in there, so they went off inside of her, causing severe burning and bleeding. They took a hot light bulb that had been lit all day, and they put that into her vagina and then stomped on her until it shattered, so that she had broken glass inside of her. The amount of damage that was done to her, it's unspeakable. And she tried to, at one point, call the police. They had passed out drunk. She managed to get to the phone that was in the room. She was having a very difficult time getting there, but she managed to get there. And as beat the shit as she was, she managed to get a hold of the police, and she was asking for help. But before they could find out where she was located, the boys caught her. They beat her, severely beat her. And then they poured lighter fluid on their hands, her feet, and her legs, and her stomach, and they lit it on fire. And they put her out because she was going into convulsions from the pain, the shock, I'm guessing. They used the dumbbells to shatter every bone in both of her hands and in her feet. They used knives to cut stab marks on her, but they didn't want her to die, so they didn't go too deep. They ripped the bottoms of her feet with the knives as well, so that she could not walk. One of her legs got broken. They jumped up and down on her head, causing severe damage. They would make her sleep on the porch or the patio outside at night with barely a sheet. It was winter, it was very cold. But at least they were letting her sleep now, I guess. You could look at it that way, I suppose. They also would put her in the freezer for a couple hours at a time. In between, when they were having their way with her, they had more fun beating on her, torturing her, than raping her. Although that's torture as well. At one point, they had 12 guys come over and join them in a gang rape. And one of those guys was 15 or 16 years old. And afterwards, after he left, he felt guilt. So he went and told his parents what he had done. And he's a piece of shit for joining in. But he's the only one that seemed to have any conscience at all. The parents called the police. The police went to the house. The boy's parents answered the door. The police said that they had a report of what was going on. They wanted to know what they had to say about that. And they acted like they didn't have a clue what they were talking about. And they even offered, hey, this is ridiculous. Would you like to come in and look around so that you could see? And they were like, you know what, no. The police figured that since they offered to let them in, they must not have had anything to hide. And they left. So many people failed this girl. So many people. Just one after another. So there was that, and then she was gang raped multiple times after that. But then they said that she started smelling like rotting meat. She also had pus coming out of some of her wounds. So they didn't find her attractive, or they couldn't get it up to rape her anymore because of the smells and the way she looked. So they went ahead in that December, which is only a month after, and kidnapped another young lady, and they gang raped her. And that one they let go. They let her go. When they came back to Junko, she couldn't eat or drink anymore. Every time they would force her to eat a cockroach or drink her urine, she would vomit immediately. Her insides were so traumatized. Her body just wouldn't accept it anymore. And she was so dehydrated. And when she vomited, they'd make her eat that. Because she was making a mess and dirtying the carpet. She had all her muscles were bruised or torn. She could not walk anymore. She could barely speak. She couldn't handle anything with her hands because her bones were broken, but they would still make her try. Her fingernails were either cracked or ripped out. Her feet were broken. She couldn't urinate properly anymore. Her internal organs, like I said, were completely demolished, and her vulva was destroyed from foreign objects and burns from cigarettes and lighters. She could no longer go downstairs to use the bathroom at all. She just had to go on herself. Her eardrums, one of them was damaged, one of them was completely ruptured. Her brain size was shrinking from the dehydration and all the trauma. She was just this side of death. but death would not come, not yet. She begged for it. She begged for it at that point, multiple times a day. When she could speak, she would beg, please just put me down. Please kill me. Just get it over with. And they would laugh at her and tell her that she wasn't going to be that lucky. They were keeping her as a pet forever. Day 44. And as she had so many other days, she begged for them to please let her die. Kill her and get it over with. She couldn't handle anymore. She didn't think. Her body was shut down. It just all shutting down. She was so broken. There was nothing left for them to break. She was just in so much pain. And Hiroshi came up with a deal for her. He said, I will set you free if, and only if, you can beat us at a game of Mahjong, which is like a tile game with matching pictures. I've played it by myself, but I don't know how to play it with other people. I'm not quite sure how that works. It'll be like playing solitaire with other people, but I don't know. Maybe somebody could tell me in the comments section down below. Anyways, broken hands, barely can see, can't barely hear, can hardly move, bruises from head to toe, internal damage beyond anything you can imagine. And that strong girl beat all 4 of them at the game of Mahjong. And did he let her go? Well, fuck no. You knew he wouldn't. Instead, he got pissed off because she won and poured lighter fluid from her stomach down to her toes and lit her on fire. And as she was burning and screaming, her body went into traumatic shock. She had a complete seizure and passed away. And never have I been so happy to say that she died. Ever. But I think that I wish that she would have died a lot sooner so she wouldn't have had to go through all the shit that she went through. But he thought she was faking, and he didn't realize she was actually dead till the next day. And then they decided they did not want to get caught. I mean, what are we going to do with the body now? Well, shit, she actually did die, stupid bitch. They made fun of her some, and then they took her body, and they put a blanket around her, and they put her in a steel drum, 55-gallon steel drum, and they put a videotape in there of an episode of a show. I can't think of the name right now, and I'm honestly not even feeling it to look it up. But apparently, at one point during her captivity, she was rambling on and on about random stuff, trying to humanize herself to them so that maybe they could see her as another human being and stop. And she said that one of her regrets is that she never watched the last episode of this show that she liked. And so they put that VCR tape of that show in with her body. Now here I was reading that and I was thinking, it's a little late now for them to fucking feel bad for her or care at all. But then I read on and it said they didn't do it because they felt bad for her or for any kind of guilt reasons. They did it because they were afraid if they didn't, her ghost would haunt them. They were worried about themselves, as always. So anyways, they poured liquid concrete in the barrel with her, put the lid on it, and disposed of the barrel. And moved on like it never happened. They discarded her like trash. And had it not been for the fact that Hiroshi was a complete moron, or is a complete moron, fucking idiot, she may never have been found. But thanks to his stupidity, her parents have some semblance of closure. Junko Furuta's funeral was held on April 2nd, 1989. One of her friends gave a memorial address, and this is what it said. Translated. Jun-chan, welcome back. I have never imagined that we would see you again in this way. You must have been in so much pain, so much suffering. The happy we all made for the school festival looked really good on you. A happy, by the way, is an outfit, okay? We will never forget you. I have heard that the principal has presented you with a graduation certificate, so we got to graduate together, all of us. Jun-chan, there is no more pain, no more suffering. Please rest in peace. Junko's intended future employer, the one she was so excited about, she never got to work for, presented her parents with a uniform that she would have worn in the position that she had accepted. And that uniform was placed inside of her casket. Also, at her graduation, her school principal presented her a high school diploma, which was also given to her parents. The location where her body was found, dumped and then found, has since been developed into what is now Wakasu Park. On January 23, 1989, Hiroshi Miyano and Joe Oguro were arrested in connection to the gang rape of the 19-year-old girl that I had told you about that past December. Then on March 29th, 2 police officers showed up to where they were locked up at in order to interrogate them about yet another case. You see, they had conducted a search of their homes and found multiple pairs of women's underwear that may have been trophies that they had kept from many of the assaults that they had committed over time. As soon as Hiroshi sat down at the interrogation table, he felt like he knew what the officers were there about. He figured they knew about his part in Junko's murder. He thought Joe had confessed already, so he went ahead and confessed as well and told them where they could find her body. The police were super confused by this confession at first because they were there referring to a completely different case, but they quickly caught on to what he was talking about, and he was immediately arrested again. The case they were there to ask him about was that of a mother and her 7-year-old who were abducted and murdered, and that's a case that remains unsolved to this very day. Junko's murder may never have been solved either, had it not been for Hiroshi's arrogance in thinking he knew what was going on, and I would call it a guilty conscience, but he doesn't have one of those. The police found the drum containing Junko's body the very next day. Her body was extremely difficult to separate from the concrete that hardened around her. She had to be identified by fingerprints, and that was no easy task either. The concrete did manage to somewhat preserve her body, but she was in such bad shape when they put her in the barrel in the first place. It was just very difficult. On April 1st, 1989, Joe Oguro was arrested for a sexual assault in a completely different case altogether, and then he was placed under arrest again for his part in Junko's murder. Things are starting to catch up to him a little bit. The arrest of Yasushi Watanabe and Nobuharu Minato followed. Several other accomplices who participated in the rapes were identified officially and publicly, but they were never charged. And there were over 100 other people who were rapists in this case that were also never charged. Also never charged were Minato's parents, and this upset the Junko's parents. So they sued his parents in civil court, and they won. And they were ordered to pay her parents the equivalent of $450,000 US, but that never happened, and I'll explain where that money went later. Back in 1988, the age that one was a legal adult in Japan was 20 years old, and that didn't change until earlier this year. In April of 2022, it was lowered to 18 years old. This is partly why the guys received such a short sentence. And the other part is that they pled guilty to a lesser charge. In Japan, even if you plead guilty to a crime, you are permitted to appeal your sentence. Each of the 4 original perpetrators appealed their sentences, and their appeals were brought in front of the same appeals judge. And this judge, rather than lessening their sentences, saw fit to add a few years to each sentence. Reading that made me smile because it's just a little bit of extra justice when she had so little, you know? Anyways, of those 4 boys, 2 of them changed their names after their convictions, trying to, obscure their identity so nobody knew who they were or what they'd done in the past. And so I wanted to be sure to mention their names and ages at the time they tortured Junko, as well as the names they go by now. So here we go. Both Hiroshi Mayano and Yasushi Watanabe kept their original names. Now, Hiroshi was 18 at the time of the crime, and Yasushi was 17. Joe Oguro, who was 18 at the time of the crime, changed his name to Joe Kamasoku, and Nobuharu Minato, who was only 16 at the time of the crime, changed his name to Shinji Minato. Also, earlier I mentioned that the Furutas sued the Minatos civilly and won. The Minatos had to sell their home in order to come up with the money to pay them the restitution, but then they never gave the money to the Furutas. Instead, when Joe, Shinji, and Yasushi were released, the Minatos gave the money to them. They said it was because that girl ruined their lives and they should be paid for it. And so it was used for shopping sprees and getting wasted. Also, her grave was, the flowers and things were knocked over. It was desecrated. I couldn't find the word. After, obviously. And it was because they felt like, some of the mothers felt like she ruined their son's life, not the other way around. I'm sorry, your son is a piece of shit. Maybe put the blame where the blame deserves to go. Maybe on your son, maybe on yourself for raising such a piece of shit. I don't know. Maybe. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and record the conclusion and be out of here because I can't talk about this anymore. It is so difficult to not be completely irate when talking about this situation. So many people failed that poor girl. And it's horrible what she had to go through. And it's really bad when I'm sitting there wishing that she would die so that she wouldn't feel it anymore. Usually, I don't hope for somebody to die that's a victim. Usually, I'm wishing the perpetrators would stop wasting our air, Okay, I'm sure this case disturbed you as much as it did me. I'm glad to be finished with this video because I can go back to my life and try my best not to think it. I don't know that I can not think of this ever again because once you see or hear something, you can't undo that. But we've got it easy. We may have to live with this knowledge, but she had to live 44 days in pure hell. I can't even imagine how that felt or what she went through. Reading the words, I'm sure 100% that it doesn't do it justice. I do wish that the guys that every single one that even laid a finger on her would have been punished. I wish that they would have gotten it. The ones that did get punished would have gotten a better, more punishment, should I say. I don't think that they should have been left back out to reoffend, like most of them did. I think that rehabilitation for somebody who has no empathy and no guilt, no remorse, there's no rehabilitation for that. You can't teach somebody how to have feelings or empathy for somebody, or you could teach somebody not to steal. You could teach somebody that it's bad to rob a bank or something, but you cannot teach somebody how to feel bad for the victims in your crime. Making them aware that they are victims, they were aware every single one of those days that she was a victim. And even after death, for the one boy's mom to desecrate her grave, like she can't even rest in peace. That pisses me off. She wasn't feeling it anymore, but her mom, her dad, her grandparents, whoever had to witness that, like they haven't been through enough losing their loved one in such a heinous manner, and then for that to happen as well, I mean, it's just victimizing them over and over again. I know that this didn't happen in this country, but things like this does happen. It happens everywhere. This isn't a Japan problem. This is a human being problem. We have to stop coddling criminals. We have to make sure that the punishment fits the crime. And I mean, if I had my way, all their dicks would have been cut off and fed to them before they got 44 days of torture before they were allowed to die, because that's what they gave. That's what they should get. That's just my opinion. A lot of people do not agree with me, and that's okay. We all have a right to our opinions. What we wish would have happened doesn't change what did happen. All we can do is hope that we can get through to people so that it doesn't happen again. I'm working on another case, and so I will be back in the next couple days to tell you that story. Until then, I hope you guys all stay safe out there. Don't forget to subscribe. Maybe shoot me a comment down below. Tell me your thoughts about this video, about this case, about these monsters that did this. I always answer all comments, and so I look forward to talking to you. Y'all stay safe out there. I'll see you soon.